We're going to call to order the October 21st meeting of the West Sacramento City Council and Redevelopment Successor Agency and Financing Authority. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight is going to be led by the President of the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, Denny Seals. The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding two cases of substantial exposure to litigation, and no action was taken. Would note that Councilmember Sandine is at another meeting, but she's expected to be here shortly. That brings us to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda, we're prohibited by state law from taking action or having a discussion on items brought up under item 1A, but it is an important opportunity for a public forum. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item to please fill out one of the yellow cards, and the gentleman in the green is modeling this right now. Thank you. Fill out one of the yellow cards and turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard, and to that end that we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart, and that flip chart simply indicates which agenda the item the council is currently considering. We take the yellow cards all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report on an agenda item. Once the council's discussion and questions or the public comment have begun, we don't take any additional speaking requests. So if you're here to speak about a specific item, I would certainly encourage you to turn the card in as soon as you can, but definitely by the end of the staff report. We also know that for some folks in the community, it's causes a little bit of anxiety speaking in public and on television before millions. And so we ask that there not be any boos or cat calls or actually even any applause or other demonstrations, and that we try to maintain a civil discourse here in the chamber. So with that, we do have one request to speak under item 1A, and that's by Ashley Dizovi from the Bridgeway Play Committee. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. Hello, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Ashley. I'm with the Bridgeway Play Committee. Obviously, as a West Sacramento resident, I'm very happy with our waste management and recycle services. But tonight, my comments wanted to be about giving credit to them, to the waste management commitment to the community. So many of us in the Bridgeway Play has heard that the waste management was active in supporting the Chamber of Commerce, local schools, and other nonprofits. But it wasn't until we approached them with our project that we realized the lengths the company will go to support community efforts, large or small. So as you may have seen in the thank you ad that we placed in the news ledger, we're thrilled with the contribution that they gave us for our effort of $5,000 to the Bridgeway Lake Park Playground Project, and also not to mention their in-kind contribution to us. So we just wanted to come tonight and thank you and thank them for their generous donation to us, and give a big thank you to them. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. That brings us into item 1B, which is council communications. Are there reports or other communications, Mr. Johannesson?
Sure. The West Sac Housing Development Corporation met on 9/24. We discussed the progress of Phase 1 of Delta Lane, which is progressing nicely. The footings are in, as you can all view up the street here a little bit. We're starting negotiations or discussions on Phase 2 and the relationship with Jamboree on that phase. And the idea there is to identify gaps in funding that aren't going to come from the city. So that's the goal at this point. And then we're also, the organization's also looking at property to develop for a potential veterans facility. And this would be for homeless vets, low-income vets, and disabled vets. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Johannesson. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no committee assignments to report on, but I did want to give some feedback and updates to my colleagues on council as well as staff and the public about my representation of the city at the Chicago study mission trip sponsored by the Metro Chamber. I went there with about 100 delegates from Sacramento to tour Chicago for some of its civic amenities, some of its innovation hubs as its growing tech sector, as well as looking at some of its land use and development, particularly on our first day. That was from Tuesday the 6th, and I was there through the 8th. our first day toured the waterfront in Chicago, which was the first time for me getting tours from folks that are involved in the management of the riverfront. I will share out through our city clerk some photos I took of that area, some principles they had about how they set up, make sure they kept the waterfront open and available to pedestrians, parkways, and residences facing the river, as well as how the amenities they set up along the riverfront. Things that I took note of. They asked me also to speak during that portion of the trip as a representative of West Sacramento for all the work we're doing on the riverfront as a nexus point for the trip. And it was really an eye-opening experience for me to kind of see how that riverfront, although it's very different in scale, and very different in usage from ours, but some of the concepts that we are adopting here along our riverfront are consistent with how they activated that waterfront for both uses for recreational use for folks that are kayaking, as well as the riverfront for as an amenity gathering place for citizens. It was a really good opportunity to talk with other delegates and other folks from our region about what we're doing on the riverfront. So it was a really good trip for that as well. I will be gathering with our president of our chamber because there are many things we learned about what the business community is doing there to encourage innovation. These are causes that I know Councilmember Johannesson and the mayor are involved with, but to encourage innovation in a growing tech industry through their facility called 1871, which is a growing tech hub. It's an impressive facility they have and are growing talent locally and keeping that talent locally, which was part of their mission. But again, it was a great trip. I appreciate the city's support of my attending that. And again, I'll be following up with some folks individually and sending some of the photos I took along the way. But I appreciate that. And if they have any questions, be happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma. And a couple reports. The region's internal study mission that's sponsored by several of the ethnic chambers in the region is this Friday, and Mayor Johnson and I are co-chairing it, I think, and then I'm facilitating a panel on what does it take to be a hip region? I don't know. So we're scraping the bottom of the barrel to try to figure these issues out, but it's good to see business leadership in trying to pay attention to trends into young professionals and creatives as well. So that's this Friday. Earlier this week, on behalf of West Sacramento Flood Protect and Mr. Christoph and his colleagues on West Sacramento Flood Safety Agency, we launched the Flood Challenge game, targeted for first to fourth graders, but fun for all ages. And it's the first of its kind game in California, and it helps kids, young elementary school kids, learn about what it takes to be flood prepared. And there's a game where documents fall out of the sky. You got to catch exactly the right ones that you should have in your kit to be prepared, and other elements for flashlights and that sort of thing. There's another one that is a Tetris-style game for sandbagging. There's stuff there on flood insurance, and we debuted at Southport Elementary School. Bill Denton, the chair of West Africa, has been a big advocate of this work, and Mr. Ledesma has been in schools every single year for flood safety, flood preparedness week. But the game was very popular with the kids, and we hope that just like recycling and so many other things, that the kids will be home, asking their parents where their flood kit is and what the evacuation routes are and where they're supposed to meet if they're at school and mom's at work and dad's at the gym. Where what is our plan? So it has and we've already gotten requests from other cities, and of course DWR and the Army Corps are interested in taking this around the rest of the state and the rest of the country. So a really creative, innovative project by West Africa and our flood team, Public Works, and it was a big success.
And we will also have, as we have in the past, the drawings that the kids have done and put them up on the board or outside or something like that, so that they and their parents can just be pretty proud of how much the kids are learning about flood protection and what they actually need. And hopefully we never have to use it, but at the same time, if we do, there's some education that's involved.
Yeah, very good. Also, the first meeting of the AARP Livable Communities statewide task force around age-friendly communities and livable communities was 2 weeks ago. We're just getting organized, but I know we'll keep it tightly aligned with, and I'm representing the cities around the state, around California that are involved in this work. So we're scoping that work out, but we'll be looking forward to connecting with the internal task force here at the city, that's commissions, and Mr. Johannes and Ms. Sandine over the coming months. And then finally, I was asked by the Association of California Independent Colleges and Universities to lead a discussion with their members, which are the presidents of Stanford and USC and St. Mary's, the nonprofit leading private colleges and universities in California around university-city relations and opportunities for improved economic development. It was an odd request because we're not home to any university of any kind. The closest two to us in this sector are UOP and its McGeorge campus, and then William Jessup University. We had a wide-ranging discussion about the possibilities for places like ours that are great social and economic and environmental laboratories, even if we don't host a university ourselves, but for potential partnerships. And both the presidents of UOP and William Jessup are now planning to come here to explore some potential partnerships as well. So which they had wanted to do before. This, I think, has provided the right crystallizing moment for it. So some potentially good opportunities to help bring some university education into the urban, the broader urban core, which we don't have today. All right, so that's all the communication. Excuse me. Item 1C is appointments to boards and commissions. We don't have those this evening. So we're going to proceed to item 2, which is consideration of initial discussion of innovation, technology, and community engagement as potential subjects for inclusion in a West Sacramento municipal charter. Mr. Robinson.
Good evening. Pursuant to the schedule that the council approved in August, we've been coming to you with an item basically per month talking about your charter process. And those staff reports have focused to date mostly on the process itself and on kind of broad overview topics related to the charter. So this report this evening is the first in a sequence that's going to drill down a little deeper and get into the actual topics that the council might want to see in the charter document itself. The topics that are discussed or that we're here to talk about this evening are innovation, technology, and community engagement. So we're asking the council to conduct a discussion on those topics and to provide staff with direction about specific provisions related to those that you might want to see in a charter document. The staff report includes a number of items within each one of those topics, specific charter provisions that you could consider. Those are there just to facilitate your discussion, not to limit your discussion in any way, so feel free to ignore those if they're not to your liking or they're not helpful. In addition to your feedback this evening, we're also asking that you approve a revised schedule for the project. The new schedule is different from the previous one that you had approved in that the individual topic meetings, instead of having 2 topics per meeting, we are suggesting maybe 1 topic might make it easier to have the discussion. That's obviously up to you. And then finally, there are 2 typographical errors in the schedule that's included, the revised schedule that's in your charter. There's no meeting on December 2nd. That should have been the 16th. And then there's the January 18th is listed, and that should have been the 20th. So there's a corrected schedule that should have been left at the dais for you. So in conclusion, we're asking that you have the discussion that I mentioned earlier related to innovation, technology, and community engagement as potential charter topics, and that you approve the corrected schedule. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if not, I'll just hand the discussion over to the mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Christoph.
I've got a couple questions, John, or one really basic question. As I looked through this and I looked through the various attachments and things, I keep coming back to, can't we do these things as a general law city and we don't have to be a charter city in order to do them?
Yeah, I think in a general way to respond to that, not all of the things that you might consider putting in a charter would necessarily be designed to fix a problem or an inadequacy that exists currently. It might be, you might be deciding to take something that's working great and to institutionalize that so that it stays for future councils. So for example, one of the ideas might be to put in the charter that there be a strategic planning process similar to the one that you do now. So that's not necessarily a new power or a new, charter-related provision, but it's something that would be then codified for future councils to do. So there's items like that. So not everything would necessarily be a new power that you'd be trying to get through the charter process.
But those kinds of issues would be raised by city manager and council members. If they wanted to change that format, then they could do that. Or if they wanted to expand it, they could do it. We could have 2 strategic planning sessions a year, we'll say.
Yeah.
But you don't need a charter in order to do that. So what exercise are we going through in order to make that happen?
Well, I think the discussion that we're here to facilitate tonight is, in a perfectly appropriate time for you to discuss that
Okay.
question, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Johannesson?
John, I don't really have any particular questions for you, but we'll just roll into the discussion now. All right, so I think we've all had questions in the community about what this is all about. And there's still a lot of elaboration that we're going to have to do to explain what's going on. But I think to address Councilmember Christoph's question of the difference between having a charter to do these types of things or not having a charter, we can kind of step back and look at what we've been able to do as a city over the years and the successes we've had. And the successes have basically been from 2 different sources. One, I think we've all, the council have worked together on creating policies, and you'll see these, they're not on the walls anymore. The last one is over there, the 2015. That's the result of our annual strategic planning session. And what happens is that those policies tend to go year to year to year and continue on, for example, flood protection and some of the others on there. And so that's the process that we go through is, we each want something coming into these sessions, and that's the results or the compromises that are made, and which is, I think, good governance. But that's just one issue that we do that we've seen over the last number of years that has allowed the city to progress. And so the other issue is our city staff, a city manager and city staff that have been able to kind of run with these ideas and be creative and being encouraged to be creative. So, but the issue is that's the way it is now, and that could change next year or the year after that, and things could start from scratch, and who knows where we'll go at that point. So I think the concept of a charter, at least the way it's kind of coming out now, is to have various statements of what the city should be doing. For example, the city should have a strategic planning session and that type of thing. And we'll go through a couple more in the technology and innovation. But it's really just to create a statement that these are the things the city will do. And of course, this is all going to voter election in November anyway, so we'll have a lot of discussion between now and then on how that happens. But getting into the areas of technology, innovation, and community engagement, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, some of the issues on innovation that staff had recommended, and John, I, and the mayor were all attended the Code for America Summit that our Code for America fellows presented a couple, 3 weeks ago. And, it was a 3-day event. I attended the first day, which went through these 15-minute talks by a number of different agencies and folks about what's happening in innovation and civic government. And so we had the opportunity to talk about these things about, how do you conceptualize agile development, for example, which is it's the antithesis of bureaucracy. It's essentially you want to not start out with huge projects, but start with small projects, prototype, and then get it out quickly, and then from there basically modify it based on the input that you get on how it's being used. And a lot of cities are starting to do this. The software community and the community has been doing this for a long time. And you're able to get out things quicker, so it becomes more customer service focused. And so you're always looking at this, the city is facing customers and how you're going to serve the customers better. And the customers are not only, business people that are doing, or companies that are doing business here, but also residents, providing effective city services. So in this particular, and the staff is recommending these, I think, based out of the talks that we've had, that, for example, we'll have a strategic planning session that's going to be required and not optional. We're going to have a statement, or we would like to have a statement that kind of institutionalizes the risk-taking, because a lot of government doesn't take a lot of risks. You've probably seen that in other cities that, you know, I think it's a natural reaction of staff to not take the risk because they don't get paid to take risks. And if it fails, then they get hammered, which is not a pleasant experience for staff. So, but this is really kind of a thing that we're saying, yes, it's okay to do that, and then to create resources to be able to do that. And there's some cities have used, for example, they have a room just for innovation, so employees can go in. If there's something they see they think that could be improved, it's a place where you can express that. And these then are eventually formulated into things that actually are implemented. You know, again, you can state that the city will use agile development, and to look at this more as a customer-fronted organization than it is now. And this gets into kind of management that the city will basically use the innovation of the staff as part of their personnel evaluation. So it's not only something that's encouraged, but it's actually something that you really want staff to do. Because we have a lot of staff that have been around for a long time, and they see things that are going wrong, and you want to make sure you utilize that in making things better. Either better for the inner city, the government works within the cities, or as they're dealing with customers. And then also to try to have someone that's assigned to actually monitor that, because I think we've said it here before, if it's not monitored, if it's not monitored, it doesn't happen. So, you know, to be able to set up goals and then to be able to measure that. On the technology side, technology really it hits a lot of fields. I mean, it's technology in of itself is one issue, and some of the potential charter provisions would be on, for example, when does staff acquire software? And I think the discussion, for those of you who have seen the staff report, is that, you know, some organizations will wait until the software is very, very mature, and then they'll jump on board with that software, and they become wedded to that software, either because it's proprietary or because their staff are engaged in or they have so much education in that, they can't move away from it. Where now there would be a focus in a charter provision that would say that we'll have to find some sweet spot on when you adopt any kind of technology, and maybe look at the difference between proprietary technology or open source technology that allows you to become more flexible in the future. We've also talked a lot, particularly in this Code for America, about data and how data can be acquired, how it can be acquired passively, how it can be acquired actively, and then how to make that data available not only to city staff in their day-to-day functions, but in allowing citizens access to that data through API access or whatever, to allow them to become more engaged in how the city's operating. One of the provisions here is for the city manager to collaborate with nonprofit entities and civic work. So, you know, if it's not in a charter, it's really just up to the city manager to do it. It's not really, or it's up to us to set a priority out of one of the 10 during the year. And frankly, if you look at those priorities, you're not going to get a priority like to have the city manager collaborate in this type of thing, because there's just so many things we're doing in the city. So this helps to institutionalize that. One thing I'd like to say about technology, it does have, and I'll roll into civic engagement, which is the next area, is technology and community engagement are really tied together. One of the problems we're having, not only, well, in West Sacramento, but all over the country, is the digital divide. And it's becoming a huge problem with parents that have kids in school, and as things become more digitized, if they don't have the capability to access these things outside of school, they can't get homework done, and it creates a huge educational gap. And so when we look at technology, we have to look at user base, essentially. So I think everybody's got a phone. I think this is one of the things they mentioned at the Code for America, that everybody's got a phone. They may not have a computer, but they've got a phone. So how do you push out technology or allow folks to use what they already have and not require them to buy more equipment? And that includes, folks that have sight disabilities and different disabilities that would maybe help or hinder the ability to use devices. So, one of the things we should be looking at in technology is who are the users of that technology, and try to get a better handle on how the technology we use in the city can roll out to the citizens. And finally, on community engagement, I think we've mentioned this a couple of times that, having folks, I like to see folks come to council meetings and, get into it. I think it's very important to what we do here. But in the grand scheme of things, you've got, 5 people. Does that really reflect a community, or does it reflect a specific segment of the community? Which it can't be ignored, but you also have to have tools that kind of be able to assess what the community is doing. And one of the concepts here is to look at more passive ways to aggregate that data by just finding what people are actually doing and what they do in their day-to-day lives, to kind of see what, is the city doing well in that area, city's not doing well. So there's some development that can be done there, but this would be something you can state in a charter that says the city will, for example, provide data access to the extent possible of city services, use the best available technology. I guess that would be within reason too. There's always a cost element. And then also, finally, when you look at council meetings, this is all broadcast on the internet right now. I think it's on local cable as well. But there's a lot of technology out there that allows a lot of interaction during council meetings. We haven't really looked at that. The pros and cons of having tweets coming in when we're doing this, and we'd have to find some way to make sure that it works with the Brown Act and public meeting. But how to continue to use technology to allow people that are going to be more and more technologically connected to participate in the process. Because I think part of transparency is having avenues for people to do that. They may not do it because they think things are going fine, but you have to have a way that they can become engaged in the event they need to. So, those are just some preliminary thoughts I've got on the concepts that we're talking about today.
Thank you, Mr. Johansson. I think both Mr. Robinson's work and Mr. Johansson's summary and work on this has been really helpful in starting to get down to some brass tacks. I don't think it's that useful for us to debate whether to do a charter at every single charter writing session. I think we need to go through the creative process and then determine at the end whether we have something that is worth doing. But we can't know until we've started to do the drafting about what the ultimate impact and value is going to be. I also think like for me, several of the items that are in the attachments that Mr. Johansson described, some of them I think don't belong in a charter. They belong in an ordinance. Some of them belong in an administrative policy. Some of them belong somewhere else. We can sort all that out. I think the point now is to really focus on the kind of question that Mr. Johansson started with at the outset, which is what has made us distinctly successful and what will we need to do differently in order to stay that way. We have had the equivalent of a charter, and that is by having, 1 or 2 council members that have been here for 50 years in total. It's provided the same line of continuous ethos, accountability, values, and whatever that a charter would. But that's not a guarantee. I don't know that those of us who have been here collectively for 50 years are going to be here for another 50 together. So that was part of the reason for this work. But I think this section in particular, more so than any of the other topical assignments, is also an opportunity to meet some challenges around changes in the economy and in the nature of the relationship between government and citizens that are happening that we only have 19th and 20th century tools to deal with. So as an example, the rise of Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and other elements of the sharing economy are changing the notion of what employer and employee and contractor are. They're changing the notion of what home and business are. They're changing the notion of delivery. They're changing a lot of the fundamental economic relationships that we've become used to. But all of our mechanisms for regulating them with business licenses or land use approvals or other things are really based on a much simpler model of how the economy and relations work than they once were. No one's really tackled this issue at scale. One of the things that came out of the Code for America conference that I thought was compelling and was right on this topic, essentially, which was that the design principles for civic technology are the same principles that really ought to be applied to government generally, and that they're fundamentally different than the approaches that we have taken. And Mr. Johannesson and the staff report both described the agile development process, but in part it's also the notion of user-centered design, which in technology is, in the civic technology work is, okay, we've got a customer, which in our case is pretty similar to the citizen notion. We have a customer. What is that customer's experience? What are their needs? What are their pain points? Let's follow them through the process that they're going through. It's much more sophisticated, much deeper, much more real than simply saying to the customer, hey, what do you think should happen? Because often the customer has no context for their experience. They have no window into what's possible or to what the drivers are. And that's real, more fundamentally than almost anything else. That's what distinguishes the Code for America civic technology, civic innovation movement, along with the agile development process, is really this focus on user-centeredness, not just being about asking users their opinion. It's the same as the Steve Jobs, notion of if I'd asked people what they wanted, we would have nothing like an iPhone, because you couldn't have imagined the kinds of things that were possible, and we would all still be using the first version of Facebook, because when the second version of Facebook came out, everybody signed up petition, everybody posted a petition online saying, do not change Facebook, and it's changed 100 times since then. We are not usually good at managing and projecting and facilitating change on an individual basis, and that user-centered design approach, design thinking, which is a discipline that didn't exist when we incorporated, is a different approach to some of these design challenges. And so as we're looking at, okay, if we were to design a Uber Lyft scheme in West Sacramento, we never had a taxi ordinance here. What would that actually look like? Not from the perspective of taxi drivers versus some big company, but in terms of residents of ours that need mobility, and residents of ours that want to drive, and residents of ours that own taxi companies, and there's a whole range of those interests. But we've never really, we don't have a concept for how the sharing economy, to give it its nice name, the sharing economy, how to relate to the regulatory mechanisms of government. And I don't know how exactly to translate that yet, but we're not the first ones to think about it. It's just nobody has really solved it yet. But that's definitely, to me, one of the kinds of issues that we can be attending to. A second is around this data issue, and the obvious one is the open data one, the area that we're already a leader in the region and nationally on, and a policy around data being open, under most conditions except a certain set of exceptions. That's a very charter-like policy, right? Because that cuts across departments, it cuts across time. That's a typical kind of a provision that would be in a charter. It's like essentially like a Bill of Rights around access to data for the public. So that's an example of a potential charter provision in that way. But similarly, as we build more technology together with partners, the ones that we just did with Code for America is a good example. Some cities have charter-like policies or charter policies that they only build products that then are open source, that they don't build proprietary products. And Mr. Johansson's got more background in this than I do, but that's the kind of policy that you wouldn't have needed to even think about even 20 years ago, frankly, even maybe 10 years ago, that is an appropriate level of policy that's not this is what should happen on Tuesday of next week by this staff person, but that is a sort of a fundamental, a 21st century Bill of Rights kind of a question. And as we have more data about citizens, and that data becomes more open, and we have more sensing technologies, so that we're able to see with cameras or with sensors in wastewater pipes or what have. As there's more and more sensing technology, resulting in more and more collected data, much of which is open, then what are our obligations to citizens in terms of the government's use of that data, privacy of that data, who owns that data? These are fundamental questions that would be in a Bill of Rights if a city had one, but that's what a charter can be about. And so articulating, scoping out what would that look like as we are, if 15 years from now we have data about every citizen, every movement, we will have wished, and citizens, I hope will have wished that we would have had a policy framework about, okay, what is that really for, and what does the value have to be in order for that to happen. So I think that there are some opportunities, in addition to the more discrete ones that are already outlined in here, that are worth probing more in this area, that are specifically about some of the big picture municipal implications of technology, in addition to the technology itself. And I really like what Mr. Johannesson said, and it's also in the staff report about the communication nodes. And most of our current policies, either because of general law or our own ordinances and municipal code, assume that all communication occurs by somebody reading legal notice, one of 1,000 legal notices at the back of a newspaper, that is the circulation of which is not even 10% of the city, or that they will drive by the back of City Hall sometime and look in a glass box and see that same notice there. That those are I think those are the only two sanctioned mechanisms that we have for notice. The number of teenagers on Snapchat is dwarfs both of those two alone. But we have no recognition of if a citizen signs up to follow the city's Twitter account, and the city's Twitter account tweets out some of that same information, that does not count. We assume nobody knows about it. But if we put a legal notice in one-point type at the back of a newspaper, then we're able to check that off. Okay, everyone in the city knows about that. That's ridiculous. It always was, but it's particularly ridiculous now. And so thinking about what is the menu of communications options that people actually use, and whether we are, I'm not saying we should mention Snapchat in the charter, but we ought to have some ability to maybe adapt over time to how communication happens. But the other thing that exists that did not exist when the general law provisions were written was the possibility for two-way communication, as Mr. Johannesson is describing, both in council meetings or through a text message back, or a variety of mechanisms by which we could collect citizen input and ideas, which we do today, but they don't count. The only ones that count is if you write a letter, and it's a public hearing item, and it goes into the official record, so a physical letter does, an email does. If you come and testify at a public hearing, it does. Those are three of the least used ways that mechanisms of communication of citizens in their regular lives that exist at all. If you send me a text message, it's not going in the record. If you tweet about it, it's not going in if I tweet it, it's not going into the record. Right? So it is incumbent on us to modernize the way in which government sanctions and recognizes and validates and uses communication to and from citizens in ways that actually respects where citizens are and what the possibilities of technology as it has advanced somewhat since 1920 when most of these provisions were written. So I do think that, that item is in the staff report, I do think that's an area where there's a lot of potential to really make this a 21st century government in a way that we hadn't been able to before. And then the last item I was going to mention is drawing from this idea that we have kind of been accreting with the entertainment districts, with the urban parking districts. We've been crafting this notion in our city, and we're not the only ones, but we're one of the few that have it as a formal coherent program in some ways, which is that different parts of different places in a city have different needs, but also Mr. Johannesson mentioned risk tolerance and risk reduction. That folks pick neighborhoods and places in the city to live in or to work in based in part what those characteristics are like. So I'm raising a family of 4, and I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and maybe what I really want at this stage of my life is quiet. I want it to be. I want stability. I don't want any surprises. Safety is maximally important to me. I want what I bought. And so the kinds of procedures that we have had and the ethic that we've had that was essentially CC&Rs put into the municipal code or into the zoning code makes a lot of sense. We've been getting a lot of requests from urban parts of the city and urban developers and TBD Fest and others but then there's this whole other group that wants liveliness, and they want dynamism and change. They want access to unexpected things or whatever. And most of our laws, most of our frameworks are put together as though all rules have to apply the same everywhere. And I think a charter could give us the right framework, not to articulate all the details, but to give us a framework in zoning, in nuisance, in a whole range of areas where we might be able to give life to the diversity of places that we're intentionally trying to create in the city without making that cul-de-sac for the family of four so loud and noisy and full of, dance clubs, and at the same time, not making the loft that we're building right on the river, fail because it has none of the vibe that it needs around it to succeed. That a charter could give us the right framework, building on what we've already done in terms of the noise ordinance, the entertainment districts, the parking standards, and some of the other policies that we've been adopting that have been based on this very idea, but that don't have a cross-cutting kind of overall framework that's articulated that could be in a charter. So, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
This one's, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to first comment on a mention you made that we wouldn't incorporate Snapchat into our charter. But it's about the only way my daughter Izzy would pay attention to what I'm doing here tonight. But yeah, this was a tough one for me to sort of grasp, and I respect Mr. Kristoff's viewpoint, like what are we doing this for? Because this one's a hard one to kind of pin down, like how do we put this into a provision? How do we put this into a preamble? We've been fortunate to have a council and a staff that thinks forward and tries to incorporate. I would never have thought to how do we get Code for America to be here, or how we could push innovation through these city mechanisms forward. We just do these things. I think we're blessed to have the council we do and the staff we do that we think that way. And so this one, but this specific part of how we address the charter and how do we instill that culture, that behavior, that mode of operation for our team, for our staff, for our councils, and for our citizens, I think is an important one because for all the reasons you've articulated, because technology is touching us every day, whether we like it to or not, and it's pushing how we live our lives differently more than we probably realize in the moment. And, so there were some things here that I gravitated to. But I think, to your point, Mr. Mayor, if there are some things that feel very much as though they are ordinances that are kind of listed here. These are things we should be thinking about in our city ordinances, how we interact, and I kind of made some notes here, I'm sorry, in administrative tasks. So, modernizing equipment, but the bigger picture is how do we set forth an agenda or a constitution for a city that says we'll embrace technology or embrace an innovative staff. What I get careful of in this types of documents, not to try to push, and when you actually get to language writing, right? You don't want to set a policy that's so forward-thinking, but it's also can be restrictive to what can happen in 10 years or some other time. But there are things that are in here that I think we have to find a way to capture and kind of bring up. And some things that you didn't bring up in terms of not just, you brought up in entertainment districts, and Councilmember Johannesson brought up our engagement, civic engagement. I think those are all uniquely important, and I think both of you have a better idea how we can accomplish that through either city ordinances or whatever. I'm also interested in how we can engage our business community in kind of advancing technology, and because that is one of the primary services we provide through planning desk and through permitting and whatever else. And I think it comes up in a later discussion when we talk about, what's not in here is articulating a broadband strategy in this. I'm not saying that's something we put in the charter, but how do we set forth the right, I think that is something we can actually control with a charter versus general law, is how we can encourage broadband competition and encourage better innovation that businesses want to come here because we've made those kind of infrastructure sort of advances. And again, those are kind of things that I think about when I thought about innovation, technology, and community engagement. The other part, I'd agree with you. My biggest point around the technology piece of this isn't, because I just don't think the way maybe you and Councilmember Johansson do around how, how can you interact with the government? I'm more interested in making sure that in this sort of Bill of Rights, as you put it, that our public knows what amount is available to them, what amount of data we collect, what amount of information is available to them, and how much is given up by them, and how we protect them and that. I think that's going to be, I think you're right, that I think when we entered the millennium, the discussions were the two biggest issues of the millennium would be water and information and privacy. Those two kind of combined. And I think we're in that era of both, unfortunately, on the water one. But on the information security, everyone, we have information on our water usage that's available to, we have information that we've made available through our billing statements that go out through. So again, how do we codify or create an environment through the charter that says this is the type of information, but this isn't. That's more just as important. This type of information that you're, as a citizen of West Sac, that we may gather for one reason or you'll be protected from this or whatever levels. I don't know quite how to put my finger on it. I'm just as worried about that. It is an open source. We should have an open source, open data policy, kind of how we apply it. But we should also be very upfront with our citizens about what it is they should feel protected from. It's nothing. I think that's equally as important for them to know. I also wanted to, in how we write this, I think a lot of it is, like I said, is preamble about the spirit of innovation. It's preamble about how we utilize and embrace technology. The community engagement one, I'm just not, again, I get that, but I think it's more, that is more the ordinance. How do we break that cycle of 2 readings and a hearing and a posting and noticing, and how do we break that? How do we break the cycle and through a charter break the cycle of the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So when we hear from 5 residents that something is not good, but 2,000 residents like it, just don't say anything about it. And Mr. Kristoff and I have our grocery store outlets are kind of like, right, how many people online are going to comment on X or Y, and that's a source of information too, and we listen to that, and I just don't know how we can codify that, or if we need to even. I'm more interested in setting the tone through the charter that says we will encourage that we will, we have to find new mechanisms, and then it may not be Snapchat in the next 2 years, maybe something we haven't even thought of yet about how we engage our community. But I want a staff and I want a council that's accepting of that, and that is looking towards those things. So again, I worry about I see the recommendations we have, and it sort of, again, I kind of list some of these things as administrative tasks that we can put in the ordinance or put into our strategic plan. But the broad brushes tell me that we need to paint a picture of how we'll accept it and use it and protect our citizens by it going forward. So those are my comments on this topic.
Yeah, I think it's a really strong discussion, and I think it's all the right ones. I mean, I think for me, part of the trick is figuring out that the charter can work in a couple different ways. I mean, one is the kind of big, like, hear ye policy statements that would look something like the way that our open data policy is. It's very principle based. It reads kind of Bill of Rights ish. There's those kinds of policies. Then there are things that are nudges. They're not a direct, this will happen Thursday by this person, whatever. But so in the strategic plan piece, as an example here, I think that actually could be an element in a charter, but not necessarily with a whole framework of it. In the same way that we currently, as the city manager is required to present a budget to us once per year. If part of that, if it's required to present a budget, based on the council's strategic plan, like what, when and how and what's in that strategic plan, is still left to the future councils. You're not trying to, set everything up in advance, but that's a small nudge in the thing. This is a reminder, okay, there's supposed to be, somebody's supposed to be doing you could still have a perfectly awful, pointless, worthless strategic plan, right? It does not guarantee success, and we've all been part of strategic planning processes in other organizations where they sometimes don't pay off. But it's a sort of small, it's just the phrase goes in to what, in as opposed to like, there's a whole section on the strategic plan shall be done in January, and it shall be no more than 2 days, and it shall be 16 pages. I don't think that's the sort of thing that's useful to be in a charter. Then the last is sort of criterion-based. So as I've been thinking about the communications piece, what if a charter said, rather than say struck out, legal notices in a newspaper and insert Snapchat, which would do us fine for about 6 minutes, and actually none of us use Snapchat, I don't think, so it wouldn't be that helpful. But if the charter were to articulate, okay, what's the criteria here, right? If the city may use, mechanisms for communicating, legal and land use information that, for which they're, based on use by, the number of citizens or or accessibility to students. Then the council and the staff through our regular process have to evaluate, okay, does Snapchat actually meet this? Probably not, but does it meet that or not? So you're not trying to encapsulate every detail. You're just saying, here's the basic framework. It's not litigable. I mean, it doesn't become the source of litigation. It's a policy statement that then gets articulated in the charter. Privacy, same thing. Because a privacy charter policy, I think you got to be careful, is reassuring, open, and adaptive, and also recognizes that most of us want the maximum amount of privacy and the maximum amount of customization simultaneously. I mean, it's just totally natural, and I want that too. I don't want Amazon to know anything about me, and I want, when I go to Amazon, for it to show me only the stuff that I want to see. Right? I don't show me any tractors or whatever. I just show me the stuff I want to see. I don't waste my time, but don't have any information about me. So that's a natural tension. That Amazon still has to have a privacy policy, and we ought to have one too. That's maybe not 1,700 pages, so you have to scroll down, but that is distillable enough in its essence that could go in a charter that recognizes those issues, the trade-offs, the value to the citizen of that information. Maybe policies about are we allowed to sell our data to the companies, that sort of issue. Right. But so it seems like the basic contours of an approach to privacy could be in a charter that we would then build out over time in an adaptive way through ordinances and policies and administrative practices as well. And then on the engagement piece, because this is one I have definitely spent a lot of time on, is not so much about the five people in a hearing issue, because it is it's an essential feature of American democracy that is the case. It's that we also don't want to create a world in which people who don't want to do that and don't have to do that, can't do that, aren't required to, if they aren't giving up their voice in government by not doing that. And so it's, to me, the part of the policy objective is designing a system of citizen engagement that operates at lots and lots of different levels, that creates the option for really, deep, exhausting engagement, but also it uses data and sensing and kind of casual mechanisms, hot or not kind of mechanisms, to get feedback and information from citizens in ways that are low stress to them. I think there is some work going on nationally around how to describe that in ways that could potentially be applicable in a charter. So rather than try to stomp out the loud hearing or whatever, try to supplement it with more kind of low-stakes information from citizens that would allow them to engage through their behaviors or through a quick text message or through clicking a like button or so. So you're getting more and more feedback, more like the supermarket, where somebody's not going to the supermarket just to see you, right? They're there, and I'm running into you.
It seems that way, though.
Yeah, it does feel that way. But they're running into you. It's like, okay, now that you're here, let me say this, and then I'm going to go get my eggs, and it's the end of the thing. I'm not going to come and sit in this council meeting for hours on a Wednesday night with all these other people. And so creating how to create the framework by which we are doing that intentionally, and then we are actually, making meaning and sense of that information and data that we don't currently do.
And part of my point on that, Mr. Mayor, is that it's happening anyway. I mean, so we're gathering information. We just it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Mr. Kristoff and I joke about our visits to the Nugget or the Rayleighs, and we come back with data. It informs us, and I think you're exactly going where I'm going. That's my point. We're gathering anyway, but how do we formalize that? How do we institutionalize? How do we get it to here so it's representative? So, the only other thing I was going to bring up too was part of this was, because we have discussed this as around policies on social media and communication. We have had the discussion here as a staff, so we're kind of already there and we're pushing it. It's just a matter of how do we continue to manage that and push it forward. So, it's been a good discussion.
Are there any other comments, discussion? It's all crystal clear, Mr. Robinson? All right. Okay, thank you.
The only question I have, John, would be is if the election doesn't go the way that charter wants to go, can't we do these same things in ordinance form or in some other resolution form or something else?
It would depend on what's ultimately in the document, but
Yeah.
many of them you probably could.
Okay.
All right, so now we're at the consent agenda. which is
Mr. Mayor,
item-
we did have the request to have the council review the schedule for the charter discussions.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so that part's an action item. All right, so there's the city manager is proposing the revision or the correction to the schedule. Is there a motion?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mr. Kristoff. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 3 through 9. There's a memo at the desk from the city manager with respect to changes to correct mathematical errors on item number 7, which is the Summerfield Park ADA improvements. Any other items on consent that a member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment?
I would like to just have a quick question on 3 and also look at 4. Right, 3 and 4.
7. If we're going to have a discussion on like
7, okay. All right, and I got 8. Anything? Sure you don't want 5, 6, or 9, Mr. Johannesson? Okay. Item 3 is consideration of Resolution 15-60, approving the final map and subdivision improvement agreement for subdivision number 5079 Bridge District Phase 2 homes located at the corner of Riverfront and Bridge Streets. Mr.
Thank you.
Ledesma.
Yeah, it's just the map. I understand we're just looking at the map, but I'm just trying to get a better sense, if you have one, around how my concern around it. I don't really have a concern. I'm just trying to understand how the housing will, the lots will orient to the walks and the alley, silo alley, and how that would work out. I'm
Yeah.
okay with the map as it sort of sits, but I just want to make sure
Sure.
it's adding to or not taking
So-
away from the urban feel and
So
how
the
we're
pub-
looking at this.
Okay, I'm sorry. The
That's okay,
public
go ahead.
access to the map is via Silo Alley, which
Mhm.
runs between Central Street and Riverfront Street. You then have 2 vehicle access alleys, which run on the east and the west side, for example, between lots 1 and 11, and then between lots 18 and lots 21. So lots 21 through 17, their front doors are on Riverfront Street. Their vehicular garage access is off the alley immediately behind them. Same with lots 12 through 16. They take their vehicular access off of the alley that runs on the east side of them. Their front doors are actually oriented on Eames Walk, which is pedestrian access only.
Okay.
And the same thing with the other side of the map. You have garage access off the alley for the contiguous lots to the east and west of that.
So I'm sorry, so you said lots 6 through 11, their access comes from where? From
Lots 6 through 11, the vehicular access is from the alley that is immediately to the west of them.
Orient, okay.
And their front doors actually face onto Eames Walk, which is pedestrian access only.
Gotcha, okay.
And they'll actually be addressed off of Eames Walk.
Right, and then the wall location you have there, so.
Right.
The other concern around Silo Alley is that we're not creating how that will be oriented or how that will be, I know we probably don't we're not there in terms of how that would be designed, but
Silo Way? Or the walk, or the wall?
the wall around, because you're showing on the here, your wall location.
Yeah, there's a wall proposed, which is immediately outside of the public right-of-way and easement, that there's actually a 5-foot sidewalk that runs down the middle of Eames.
Right.
And the wall is on either side of that and goes the width of Eames Way, or Eames Walk. If you could pull up the second exhibit, kind of gives you an idea of what the wall looks like. It doesn't show the break, you know, I think at some point, the developer's going to want to put a gate across that.
Okay.
They've indicated that might be the case.
And how high is this gate?
That's a 6-foot wall, and that's what is shown currently on the improvement plans, which have not yet been approved. Staff's talked with the developer, and the latest plan is to only have a 3-foot section, which is, you can't see through, and then a 3-foot section above that, which you can.
Okay. Yeah, that was part of my concern around some of these walkways, is to make sure they stay open and
Correct.
eyes on them and all that sort of stuff. Okay. It's just hard to tell from this, I know it's just a map and we're looking at it, but I just wanted to get a sense for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, item 4 is information on proposed River Edge Apartments and retail project in the Bridge District.
Yeah, I just wanted to first, so our actions is, this is a file and read and file update, so we're not really, we're just looking at this item just to understand the urban beach design and I just want to offer some feedback on this if possible, just in terms, there's 2 things. One is, I don't think the developer is here tonight. I think they're out of town tonight, but I think it's a great looking design. I just want to make sure that, are we, I know it's conceptual at this point. Is there, I would just encourage the developer and staff to work with the developer on this, to not make it, as we get down to actual planning, is to make it such a small footprint that it's not usable or whatever. I think that the word is out that this urban beach is out there, and the reaction has been very positive. And I know the developer has encouraged this idea, but I want to make sure that we do everything we can to make it the amenity it has. I think with what its potential could be as kind of the northern bookend of kind of the riverfront on that side in the Bridge District, it's a huge opportunity that I just don't want to press upon staff as much as we can to use that opportunity and encourage them. I think the developer is there in terms of they see the potential of it. But one of the things I learned from Chicago and the River District is that to articulate sort of rooms along the riverfront where people can have different experiences along it. And this would be one compared to the barn, which would be a little farther down and so on. So again, I just wanted to kind of have an opportunity to provide that feedback, and I'm not sure what staff or anybody else has to kind of update on where this is at the moment.
Well, I just want to pile on, because I 100% agree that a project of this scale and at that location, I mean, it is the urban beach concept is the whole marketing of it, and it's appropriately so. I mean, it's the strongest opinion across the entire region that we don't use our waterfront, and a beachfront really is, it's a really cool idea, but it won't work if it's 6 chairs and some sand. I mean, if you do it, you got to do it. So I know there's plaza space that's involved, and that the developer is looking at, potentially bringing features of the urban beach into some of the other nodes on the Riverwalk, which might work. I mean, we're not micromanaging every detail of the project, but we actually have quite a few plaza spaces along the length of the Riverwalk. We have no other beach space, and so if folks are thinking, I'm going to go to the urban beach, and both chairs are already taken, it's going to kind of create a letdown for the project. So it's a great idea, but it would be especially great if it was done at the right scale.
Right. I just wanted to get that feedback on the record.
And if I may, Seamus has been working with the developer. They have a family issue tonight. They're not here, but I got feedback there. They're going to watch the tape of the council meeting. The issues you've been raised have been raised by staff as well. I do think they see this as a great opportunity. It's been quoted in the Business Journal as such by them. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, it's all over Snapchat, apparently. All right,
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, item 7 is consideration of approval of plans and specifications and award a contract to Abide Builders Incorporated for the construction of the Summerfield Park ADA improvements. Mr. Christoph.
John, we received a memo as far as approve additional funding.
Yes.
Was all that additional funding also applied to the non-winners of the bid process?
The additional funding is basically just an additional staff time for, this went through a design phase, so it doesn't have anything to do with the bidding process.
So still the Abide Builders, their bid is the bid that we're using, 209,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Item 8 is consideration of contract amendment number 1 with Tom Trzynski Consulting for an amendment to the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. Hi. Katie, the item calls for the formation of an interdepartmental technical advisory committee with the stakeholders. Can you describe, the reason I flag this is, I just want to be sure that this is, this district is designed, visioned, and conceived of as a city area, and particularly in relationship to the State Streets, West Moore Oaks, Old West Sacramento area, and to some extent to Southport on its bottom side, and a little bit to the Bridge District, mainly to the adjacent neighborhood, that it's seen as much a part of that or an activator for that, and not simply be treated like, in some ways, like we treated the Bridge District, which was, okay, property owners, figure out this, we'll work with you to figure out the solutions, but the adjacent neighborhoods there weren't any. So it wasn't that issue wasn't present. So I just want to be careful, because the committee sounded like it was the stakeholders from that area, meaning the property owners and the businesses that are there. But for the long-term activation of this district, it needs to be attending to, it needs to be thought of as part of the West Sacramento area. So what's really happening with this TAC?
So the original intent of the TAC was to do what we did in the Bridge District, form something that was just for the property owners exclusively during the initial, the existing conditions assessment, where we were gathering information about constraints, and then we were putting together like an initial market study to better understand what the build-out would be for Pioneer Bluff, and then to also make sure that we were getting good information as the Broadway Bridge was moving out of its feasibility study stage into the CEQA document. So the TAC has a limited sort of shelf life attached to it, that that they would sort of cease to have early information once we reached the visioning exercise, where the more general public would be engaged on sort of the traditional kind of activities that you were referencing, sort of, how do you want to have this connect to your neighborhood? What are your expectations for your connections to the waterfront? What are you looking for in terms of like bike, pedestrian, transit connectivity? We were really just looking to form something prior to coming back to the council with the existing conditions assessment report and the update to the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan, which is recommended in this, so that we had your approval to do that with just the particular property owners. But it doesn't extend on past the visioning, component where they would be seeing, say, parks plans before the council.
Yeah, but so the market analysis of what?
We received a proposal from some of the property owners who have property in the South Pioneer Bluff area. They've asked for our input at the staff level about the feasibility of the infrastructure, that would be needed for that, and the feasibility of the land use mix that's proposed in relationship to the update to the general plan. And we wanted to engage in those conversations with them to sort of test whether or not the market that they're proposing is consistent with the assumptions in the general plan, but we didn't want to engage in those kinds of conversations without getting council's blessing before doing that. It's a little outside of the scope of what was originally proposed in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. It's a little more like preparing for a development agreement which is ahead of the schedule that was discussed in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. So, and we don't have to form it, I should be
Well,
clear, we're just.
Do you, is the reason for why I'm concerned, does that make, are you understanding what that's about?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think that we envisioned the TAC continuing to sort of be at the forefront once we actually got to the point where we wanted to engage the other communities. It was really just to sort of say, okay, we have, for example, we have a flood delineation that needs to occur. We need stakeholders that will show up to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board meetings that will be saying, absolutely, the urban levee design criteria that you're proposing, it's inconsistent with the bluff. We need to eliminate that 20 to 30 foot maintenance road that's on the toe that's being proposed. And so we wanted to create this ongoing group of people who could be that advocate as we're dealing with all of these issues. But those really don't pertain to sort of, I think, what maybe you were referencing to, but if I'm misunderstanding, I think what we were just trying to do was make sure that we had that group at the very beginning advocating for some of these tough issues that deal with the constraints, not really sort of with the opportunity side, which is when I would imagine that we would be engaging the larger community.
Okay, that's, yeah, I'm just not sure what the market, so, I mean, this, I mean, what I don't want to say, I mean, it's possible that just the property owners, of which we're a major one, so
Right.
and we haven't figured out ourselves what our own interests are there, but it's possible that the property owners might come up with exactly the right, notion for what and I know they've been working on it, so it's not that's not out of the question. It's not the most likely way to get to this district, and the way that the bridge gets configured and lands and all of that. Those constraints determine also what the ultimate possibilities are going to be. And I really want to, throw a big caution, because what we learned from the bridge district is applicable in the bridge district because it didn't have adjacent neighborhoods. And so we cannot just copy that process again in an area that's now surrounded by 3 neighborhoods that need to be, from the front end, engaged in some way. Now, I'm not a fan of necessarily having a bunch of meetings and all that we were just talking about. So some way or some other lens. It doesn't necessarily even have to be people. It could be that user design process, but where somebody in this process is charged with putting on the hat of a resident of Virginia, or putting on the hat of a resident of the Gateway neighborhood, or whatever, that those perspectives, interests, and possibilities are from the beginning affirmatively inserted into the process of figuring out which constraints can we live with and which ones are too expensive and what's possible. That's really essential from the beginning if we want to avoid the kind of Curtis Park Rail Yards project that took 7,000 years to get done, because it wasn't oriented towards the neighborhood around it. Folks thought they could just design a project inside in the pocket of that neighborhood. We cannot do that in this place. And so I'm okay with this, but I just think it's going to be very important for staff to either figure out how to design those considerations indirectly, or think of an augmented process. Because, as I said, the Bridge District process was a great win, and it was exactly the right one for that area, but it did not have the same constraints or opportunities in terms of its neighborhood adjacency that this one does. And the bridge itself, the Broadway Bridge, this definitely cannot be the primary stakeholder group for the Broadway Bridge, I mean, for sure, so.
I absolutely agree with that
Okay.
statement.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so that's consent agenda items 3 through 9 with the modifications, item 7. If there's no further questions or discussion, is there a motion?
I'll move the consent agenda items.
Okay, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma, seconded by Mr. Kristoff. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. That brings us to item 10, which is consideration and award of contract with various vendors for acquisition of heavy equipment and adoption of Resolution 15-59 declaring the city's intent to reimburse itself from tax-exempt financing for certain expenditures made or to be made in conjunction with the acquisition, construction, and equipping of certain capital improvements.
Mayor, members of the council, typically city departments, when they're purchasing equipment, will bring the request for approval to you directly, but because these 6 equipment purchases are proposed to be a debt financing is bringing it to you. It's not unlike the other financings we did that were equipment leases for things such as the Acela software upgrade, the mobile data computers, and then last year we had purchase of fire apparatus equipment that was done this way. So we do have representatives from the Public Works Department who are here if you have any technical questions about the equipment being purchased. The action that you're being asked to approve was going to do really three things. It's going to authorize procurement of the heavy equipment through 4 vendors. It's going to acknowledge the method of the procurement as being consistent with the city's purchasing policy, and then finally authorize the financing of the purchase through an amendment to our existing master lease with the U.S. Bank. And so the budget appropriation for the equipment was already approved back in June as part of the 2-year biennial budget. And the equipment to be replaced, which is really deemed at the end of its serviceable life, that was called out specifically in the budget. And we're going to have 4 vendors who supply the equipment: Municipal Maintenance Equipment, Downtown Ford, Papay Machinery, and Riverview International Trucks. Finally, the procurement's going to utilize 2 methods that is called out in the city's purchasing policy. One is to utilize the state Department of General Services CMAS program, and the other will use a cooperative purchasing agent. In this case, it's National Joint Powers Alliance. Anyway, those methods rely on another entity's competitive solicitation rather than doing our own RFP. Finally, the terms of the equipment lease will provide for a 10-year term, annual payments of approximately $135,000 with an interest rate of 2.23%. So interest rates are still pretty low. And finally, the Resolution 1559, approval of that will allow a reimbursement for any equipment purchases that happen prior to, well, after approval, obviously, tonight, but prior to execution of the actual lease agreement. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Other questions? All right. Any comments or a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move the recommended action.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Kristoff and seconded by the other 2. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11 is consideration of a presentation by R3 Consulting Group of their analysis of the city's waste hauling services contract and recommendation to begin limited term negotiations with Waste Management.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm here tonight with Richard Tagore Irwin with R3 Consulting Group, who was hired by the city to perform the analysis of our contract, the market condition study, and to provide a recommendation to the council or to the city as to whether or not we should negotiate with Waste Management or begin the procurement process. Richard's presentation tonight will go through the findings that R3 has come up with that has led to their recommendation to the city that we begin a limited term negotiation with Waste Management with the understanding that if we can't reach an agreement within that period of time, we would then move to the competitive procurement process. Staff is requesting council support of this recommendation and then direction to begin that negotiation. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Richard to begin his presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. And I always like to start our presentations with a general statement about myself and our company, R3 Consulting and myself. We only work for public agencies. We do not work for any private solid waste service provider, landfill operators, or material recovery facilities. So we only work for public agencies. And put it up or walk through. Just a little bit of background. Your contract you have with Waste Management has been in place since the city incorporated in 1987. It has been amended several times. It is slated for expiration of December of next year, so a new contract will be needed to be put in place. Your Waste Management is the exclusive provider of all your residential and commercial services, commercial front loader services. Your roll-off services are on a permit system. It's open competition permit system. There's franchise fees associated with each of those services. And currently, the city does the billing and the customer service for the residential and commercial services. It's kind of an important note. Right now, it looks like projected, the refuse fund is basically paying out more than it's collecting. The contract with Waste Management has been in place. It's got an annual escalator, CPI type of escalator, with a fuel index and landfill fees, and it goes up every January. The city sets the rates that it charges its customers. Currently, the rates that you charge your customers are less than you're paying your contractor. So the current deficit overall for the refuse department is about $311,000 projected to 2015, 2016. If you look at just the contract by itself, the city's deficit is about $600,000. You're receiving less, about $600,000 less in fees from your customers than you're paying Waste Management. So going in the future, something to keep in mind that you're going to probably want to start addressing. So when we did our analysis, we looked at your current franchise agreement. We also looked very hard at the market area. What is the surrounding haulers? What are the rates? What are the services? That has a lot to do with what you should do going in the future, whether you want to negotiate or go out to competitive bid. One of the things we did find, your customer rates, the rates that you charge your customers are very much on the low side. Your customers are really well taken care of from a rate standpoint. Along with that, however, is the agreement that you have. I think we kind of characterize it as a kind of a typical 1985, 1990 garbage collection agreement. It was designed specifically to collect garbage. Recycling services were added on, other services were added on, but it was primarily to pick up garbage. And that's how the whole contract is. It's one of the reasons you have very attractive rates, but the level of services are starting to lag behind. And more importantly, as legislation has been passed the last several years, requiring more and more requirements, you're going to have to be changing your services specifically for your commercial customers. There's a lot more requirements on your commercial customers to recycle recyclables as well as to start diverting organics. Those are all issues you're going to have to address regardless of your service provider, whether it's Waste Management or a different service provider. You will need to have a new franchise agreement that's going to address all the legislative requirements, all your residential commercial food waste, basically a performance-based contract that really holds your hauler accountable to their performance. Things such as on-call bulky waste, which is a very popular program. And then there's other items, more administrative items, such as your bond, your performance bond. The current performance bond on a $6 million a year contract is $50,000. It's a very, very low bond amount. That amount is supposed to protect the city in case of a default of a contract. That is not sufficient. Same thing with the insurance requirements that are in the current contract. They're very low. It's $1 million insurance requirements. It's typically $5 million or $10 million, depending upon the issues there. Again, so what we've concluded overall, that regardless if you negotiate or got a competitive bid, you need to have a new franchise agreement. So I can put this the right way. So we looked at negotiations, conducting a competitive procurement process, or basically a hybrid of the two items. What we're recommending at this point, with a couple caveats, is to provide about a 3-month period to negotiate with Waste Management. The caveat being require Waste Management to pay for the negotiations up front, require Waste Management to provide a 3 to 6 month extension to the current term. Okay? And it's basically to give you some additional wiggle room. If the negotiations don't go well, then you have, one, it's been paid for, and two, you have additional time in the current contract to go through a competitive process. And again, we looked at market conditions, the cost to the city, the timeline, transition, and external perception. Those are all issues that come up in any of these processes. Specifically on the market conditions, you have a lot of haulers in this area. You have Republic Services, you have Waste Connections, you have Waste Management. Those are all large, the 3 largest national haulers in the United States. You've got other local California haulers such as Recology, very strong in the Bay Area and Placer County. You have Davis Waste Removal. You have Atlas in Sacramento. You've got Cal Waste as well. So you have a community of haulers here that could be interested in proposing on this project if you went out to competitive bid. You also have low customer rates. We looked at all those things. So you have a competitive marketplace. You also have low customer rates. Cost to the city, specifically things you want to consider, is negotiation is generally less costly than a competitive proposal process. And the impact in the refuse fund, it's an opportunity to make some adjustments to your refuse fund to get it on a stronger financial footing. Timeline issues, negotiation process, again, what we're recommending is about a 3-month period. A competitive RFP process is 9 to 12 months, and that's a pretty condensed schedule to get it done in a year with a new service start date. Transition, if you go out to competitive bid and another service provider is selected, you will have a transition. Every account will change. You'll have, in essence, 55,000 containers that will be swapped out. You could have day changes and other issues. Transitions, all of the haulers that are in this market area have done transitions and they know how to do it. It would not necessarily be a terrible thing, but you will have issues with that. The last one is sort of external perception. We've done a lot of procurements and we've done a lot of negotiations, and the question always begins is, what is the perception of the public? Is this something that we should have gone out to competitive bid or not? Would we have gotten a better deal on a competitive bid process? And the answer is, you can't tell until you go out to competitive bid. Again, when we looked at market rates, your customers, particularly your 32 and 64-gallon customer, which is about 90% of your residential rate base, have some of the lowest rates in the region. Your 32-gallon customer rates, which is about 16% of your rate base, has the lowest rate in the region. Your 64-gallon customer rate, which is about 17% of that rate base, or 57% of that rate base, has the 4th lowest. Your 96-gallon rate base is also very low for the rates. Your commercial customers are also very well taken care of. The way your rates are structured right now, it's on a per yardage basis, so it's just a multiple. As the yardage goes up, as the frequency goes up, it's the same multiple. But overall, your commercial customers have some of the lowest rates in the whole area. And we concluded the initial analysis in April. We were asked to sit down with your staff and Waste Management to see what Waste Management could possibly offer. And they've offered up, the framework of a fairly reasonable deal, in essence, over a 10-year period. Most of these deal points would be here regardless if you're on a competitive basis or an RFP process. In essence, it's a 10-year term. We'd recommend that any extensions beyond 10 years specifically be tied to performance. New programs and new fees, such as potentially an AB 939 fee to help pay the city's cost of administering these programs, and a road impact fee. Many communities in the area have a road impact fee that's specifically set aside to help with the city's roads. The garbage trucks are heavy and they stop basically in the same spot 3 times a week on all the residential streets, and it does have a lot of wear and tear. One of the items that we think is very important going forward is a franchised hauler diversion requirement. As the city is required to meet its state requirements, your franchised hauler is really your front line of that defense, and you need to hold them accountable. Currently, your franchised hauler Waste Management has their diversion of all of their franchised residential commercial programs is about 31%. We're suggesting that be bumped to 50%. They've agreed they could do that. So for them to go from a 31% to 50% is a large increase in diversion. That's going to require new programs, primarily a significantly beefed up commercial recycling program and new organics programs, both in the residential sector and the commercial sector. Waste has offered to provide a half to a full-time sustainability coordinator to help implement all these programs. Again, the commercial and residential food waste, that's really one of the new program areas that is hitting everybody across the state. The commercial food waste program is a state-required program that puts the requirement on your commercial generators. They're going to have to do this. It starts April of next year. Keep the city in compliance with all of the AB 939, AB 1594, which is you can't use green waste as alternative daily cover and get diversion credit. 1826, which is the commercial recycling, put the requirement back on the hauler to make sure the city is in compliance, to keep yourselves out of any liability issues. Adding new programs such as an on-call residential e-waste, bulky waste, e-waste program, very popular program in other communities where basically the residents call up and schedule it. They come to their house and they pick it up at their house. It's not laid out on the curb all day, or they don't have to drop it off. It's a very good program. Continue your other programs that you do have, your compact fluorescent, your educational grant programs, and your special waste events. And again, this is all predicated on receiving favorable rates. And if let's say the rates were to increase 3 or 4% for the next several years, If you applied those to your current rate base and you still compared it to your surrounding communities, you still have a very favorable rates compared to your communities. And last is a schedule, a negotiation process. We're suggesting to take a 3-month period, starting in essence tomorrow, if that's the direction from the council, and finalizing those negotiations early January, bringing you back the recommendations, and if they're successful, a finalized franchise agreement for your review, comment, and further direction in your January 20th council meeting, which means we all get to council holidays if that happens. If, on the other hand, you want to go through a competitive process, again, you would need to start that either tomorrow if you wanted to, or as late as in January. January to January is a 12-month process. Okay, typically you would want 12 to 18. You can do it in 12, but we'd have to stay on task. It has to stay on schedule. The scheduled date is meeting a August council date for a selection of a vendor is critical, because you need the other 6 months for a transitionary period. Keep in mind, if on a transition, unless waste management is through a competitive process would be procured, the new service provider is going to have all access to all of your account base, all your customer levels, all the subscription levels, and they're going to be responsible for working with waste management to swap out, in essence, 55,000 containers citywide. It's quite an effort to have that happen. It does not happen overnight. The more time they have up front to do that, the easier the transition goes. Hence, you really need to have, through a competitive process, a contract in place in about August of next year. If not, you're going to need to extend the current contract out to give you more time. And with that, we'll open up to questions and answers.
Are there questions at this time? Just a technical one to maybe to Paulina. So the recommended action in the staff report is just begin a 3-month negotiation. It doesn't specifically articulate all the conditions that were just described in terms of upfront payment, the extension, and all of that. Is that not the staff recommendation?
It is our staff recommendation. I didn't, that's an error. I didn't include that in the recommended action on the report. But that was our understanding of how that process would happen, is that we would begin negotiations with them based on the fact that they would provide an agreement to pay and then offer a time extension on the backside so we could have additional time if we need to go to bid.
Okay. Are those the only two of the conditions in?
Other than the one that we state that, that it's a 3-month period.
Yeah.
So the 3 conditions are the time period, offering an extension on the back end, and then paying for the negotiation process.
Okay. Other questions at this point? All right, then let's hear from Tim McGill from Waste Management.
Thank you. It's been a while since I've been here, and I do know what Snapchat is. We've always tried to be and always viewed our relationship with the city as a partnership. And also with the community and our involvement in the community. And we have approached our discussions with the city as a partnership. And what they've described here, using the existing rates that the customers are paying, is what we're talking about using. We currently, those 50,000 carts that are out there, we've paid them off. If you recall from our previous contract, one of the things that you wanted was us to reduce our carbon footprint. We initially were going to do that by going to biodiesel when the thought of a biodiesel plant was going to be in town here, and that didn't happen. So we bought a whole new fleet of CNG trucks. So we own the containers, we own the trucks, and we're passing that benefit back to the city because we don't need to buy new trucks because they're in good shape and they're going to work. We do replace containers as we need to replace them. So what we've done is we've worked within in our discussions within the rates that the city residents and commercial customers are currently paying. And so when the consultant and your staff indicates that your rates are going to be great, they are. And they're going to stay that way. I mean, I don't know what adjustments the staff may want to make, but currently, we're working within those rates. We're going to eliminate city deficits in the garbage area that they talked about. We're adding all the new programs that R3 was discussing there. And so we have a whole package of things that is an amazing, I think, package that a partnership with the city would like to see. So we hope we'll have your support to use the 90 days to go out and put all the meat on the bones here and come back and show you where our agreement stands with all the other communities in the area. And you can make a decision at that point, you know, that you want to go to RFP. We understand, but you gave us an opportunity, and we're giving you, I think, the very best deal. And I don't believe that other companies, because they don't have the equipment and the footprint that we have here in West Sacramento, nor do they have the relationship with the community that we have and cherish, actually. So with that, if you have some questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Well, you've done this before. I see you're right at 3 minutes. All right. Thanks, Tim.
Okay.
All right, so let's return to the council for discussion. All right. Mr. Johannesson, to go last.
I can, I need to start discussion. Yeah, I think it's been a long history with waste management in the city, and I know folks have been around in the community, a lot of activities within the community and support over the years. I also understand that the perception issue that you raised, that, you know, if we have the same company year after year after year, then the perception may be that there's something going on. But I mean, I would be comfortable with the 3-month staff proposal on this, considering the history that we have. I'm a little bit concerned about, well, timing. I think we can probably bridge. You know, if it does go after RP, we can always do that. But it's the whole transition, I think, that I know the companies have done that before, but it adds a little bit of confusion to customers. And, you know, if we can find a way to avoid that and plus keep the transparency going in terms of how we're awarding these contracts, I'm fine with staff recommendation.
Mr. Christoph?
Yeah. One of the things I was really glad to hear is we can, in the public works budget, we always have this little glitch, so to speak, and that's going to get taken care of through this process. So I was really glad to hear that. But we've been with Waste Management since we incorporated. They were the hauler that we chose. And I think they've done an outstanding job. We had a lady come in earlier this evening and talked about waste management and how all of the positive things that waste management did for the park and this and that. And that's the kind of that's the kind of company that I hope we can continue to do business with. I wish more and more of them were that way. But, and Waste Management has always really sort of stepped to the plate on any of the civic activities and civic things that various cities, organizations within the city, or anybody else do. And as we saw on the rate structure, I mean, our rates are really very good. And so I'm just hoping that Waste Management can sharpen their pencil as far as franchise fee goes, or something like that, to generate a little extra money as far as the city is concerned. And I'm hoping that we can all benefit by that. And so I would be in favor of giving the extra 90 days or additional 90 days, 3 months, in order to let R3 and Waste Management get in a room and pound out an agreement that the city can really be proud of and look at as a sort of a blueprint for maybe other cities. And because I think that we can do that. I think there's enough room in the whole business structure that can allow for something like that to happen. But looking forward to it.
Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and the report, which was, I read through, and I'm going to admit I'm not an expert in waste management and hauling services, so I'm going to have some dumb questions. First, I do have a question just about the negotiating period, and it's just a timing one. It's a 90-day starting, in essence, if we agree tomorrow. And but I just want to make sure we're accounting for the fact that the city offices are closed in December, and we think of, just to make sure staff and thinks about that time frame, and to give yourself the time, adequate time. So in the report, you bring up the fact that we may not be adequately addressing legislative requirements, and you bring up AB 939, I think it is, right? And again, in AB 341. And I guess I'm just asking, there's two questions around this. Are we currently out of compliance with those legislative, and are we liable, or are we facing, and if there's a liability issue or in compliance with those issues, what are penalties, and do they hit the city, do they hit them? It was just not specific enough for me.
Your franchise agreement, as it's currently written, doesn't really address the legislative issues and the liability protection that is in typical more modern franchise agreements. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is any new agreement, you're going to want to shift that liability from the city's ratepayers to the hauler if there's any issues with compliance. Currently, the city is in compliance with AB 939 at the state level. You're meeting your diversion requirements, you have your programs, you offer commercial recycling. That's kind of the basic requirement. You're offering that program. AB 1826 is commercial organics program. By the end of this year, the city has to start that program, and i.e. start the public education outreach for that program. By April 1st of 2016, the largest commercial generators that generate the largest amount of organics are supposed to be provided that program. They're supposed to subscribe to that program. The legislation is geared on the generators. The city is in essence the middleman that's supposed to allow that and to help facilitate that to occur. Your current contract doesn't address that. So even in the next year, you're liable to have to work with Waste Management to get that type of just basic compliant program going. The way that starts, it's targeting, the legislation has a tiered implementation. So for the starting April 1st, it's those commercial generators that generate 8 cubic yards of organics. Organics being yard waste and food waste. So it's a fairly large, a grocery store. That's who that's going to go after. It's not going to go after a barber. They don't generate that much organics. So, but again, your current agreement is just silent.
But where there's and I'm not trying to, we have no record in the staff of being out of compliance in any of these, or being warned of by state agencies.
No, we're not out of compliance with any of the current regulations, but.
But I agree that we should have a contract that articulates what's expected, and I'm in favor of that. I just want to be clear, because frankly, the way it reads, it raises suspicion. I didn't want that to be the case, or I didn't want to make sure it wasn't the case. The other areas that you bring up are best practices, and you also bring up other contracts and what are in them. And I guess I'm just trying to understand, those are contracts that, I mean, all these contracts are public to a degree, the programs they provide. And are we advocating as a staff any of these programs to be included? And is part of our recommendation, other than what we find in a contract? Are we trying to get to a level of service that's I'm not articulating this right, let me rephrase this. Is the level of service we're getting not equal to what maybe other jurisdictions are getting, or is the contract just not articulating it the way that other contracts are written?
So we're not getting the level of services that other jurisdictions may be receiving because our contract doesn't specify that the hauler provides those services. So a good example is our contract currently requires Waste Management to help support bulky waste drop-off events. But most other jurisdictions have moved to bulky waste pickup appointments. So a lot of times we have questions from customers, why don't we have that? Why don't we have this service? Why don't we have that service? So we are advocating that we move to more convenient services for our residents, such as a bulky waste pickup appointment.
Okay. And I think the only other kind of question was around the insurance piece of it. And are we, the level of insurance currently isn't, again, you articulated that isn't where it is. I'm just trying to understand, is that a standard insurance levels we should be hitting? Is there, I'm just trying to figure out how we're benchmarking this and how we're articulating this as a deficiency in what we're doing.
Let me split the two pieces in half. There's the insurance, the liability insurance and all of that, and I think right now your current contract calls for $1 million. Typically, we see $3 to $5 million for auto liability, professional insurance. And we also see an additional policy for environmental indemnification of $10 million. You don't have that now. So you've got, your insurance that you have in your current contract is on the very low end. Your performance bond is a whole nother issue. Typically, the performance bond is a month to 2 months of quote-unquote revenue, which would be more of about $1 million or $500,000 at least. You have a $50,000 performance bond. That's to protect the city in case the service provider walked away.
Right.
Waste Management's a large company. It has a lot of resources. The likelihood of that happening is just very, very small. Another service provider, a small service provider, they may look at this and just walk away and leave the city stuck. Because $50,000 is not sufficient to pull under an emergency services contract anybody to come in and provide services for you in a short term. So that's one of the other areas that you're going to want to increase to, in essence, best practices or industry standards, which is a month and a half to 2 months of revenue.
Okay. Thank you. And as I said, thank you for your answers, and Pauline, thank you for articulating. I am supportive of trying to get to a negotiation stage with them. It is important that our contracts, at least my perspective is the contracts we have with our vendors and our partners are clear for the public to understand the services we're getting. And also, that is clear for us that we understand, it articulates what we expect from a service standard, and not just to hold people accountable for keeping in compliance, but I think Waste Management, you've been a great partner, and it's no indictment, but we're in the public realm, and those contracts are necessary to make sure that the trust between us and the public and how we're administering services are clear and concise. So that's my view. I appreciate your answers today and clearing up some of what I thought I was reading into those. So I appreciate it.
And I apologize to my colleagues that I had another meeting that I was attending for work. In terms of my reading of the report, I found the research done by R3 to be incredibly valuable in terms of all that it showed for us to look at kind of how we stand. So that was incredibly valuable. I'm sure you heard more of that. To me, because we have such low rates, it seems like the relationship has value to our citizens. So the relationship we've had and the kind of, but I think to your point, I did write a note to myself about, we definitely need to look at we have to come into compliance. So I think that the points that you just raised, Mr. Ledesma, about that in a new contract, we have to address those things. So in terms of the recommendation on that's being, I think, in front of us, it seems to me that we'd have a short period of time to look at a negotiation, and then it would give us another, if that wasn't successful for some reason, it'd have to be fast, we'd have another opportunity. So that seemed to me reasonable, given that we have so much research in front of us about what we're looking at. And it seems like we'd be able to tell, are we getting everything we can, everything we need, everything we should be for the citizens? That's my coming in late review.
I think every time this contract's been up, since I've been on the council, which is at least 3 or 4 or 5 times, I made the point, and I'll make it again. I in general, believe we need to be issuing actual competitive bids the maximum extent possible, or at least occasionally. That particularly in this scope of area, this is the largest of our services that we contract out at $6.5–7 million. It's a non-trivial function of the city, and it's the only one of our core functions that we've contracted out to a private company. So it's a very significant decision by the community. One, not to operate it ourselves, and then two, to contract with a particular company. And the economics literature and research is quite clear on this. If you don't bid out, if you maintain a contractual relationship over an extended period of time without bidding, ultimately you get trapped in that relationship. And for reasons that we've heard tonight, okay, we've already paid off the things, or the community groups or whatever. The specialization between the two of us becomes so tight that it's impossible to exit that relationship. And in some respects, that's a market strategy. I think one of the things the R3 report notes is that the trend that the waste haulers generally are, at least in this region, are moving away from focusing on just trying to make sure they have the appropriate market share to, okay, what's their bottom line? In other words, they have accomplished the market share objective. There's not as much competition as there might otherwise be, and therefore they have more leverage in a contracting process to extract more from the public sector. I'm using all these terms without any moral judgment. I would do the same thing. I am doing the same thing from this side of the table, so it's perfectly appropriate. But that's the basic nature of transaction cost contract economics. So I do think it is important that in our contractual relationships that we be attentive to that and when we feel comfortable and attached and emotionally connected to a contractor, that's the moment especially to pay attention to these issues. It's also important not to just shoot yourself in the head, though, either. So I'm supportive of this 3-month period because it's an opportunity to say, okay, if we got to the end of the line in an RFP process, what's the optimal arrangement that might emerge from that? And if we can get to that now, then it's worth it. It's worth a try. So I'm supportive of doing this, but it's not with an expectation that this is pretty much done and we're not going to a competitive phase. I'm still planning for the competitive phase, yeah, but would be thrilled if instead of having to go through that, we reached an equivalent outcome through the 3-month direct negotiating process. Having said that, I'm a fan of waste management for a lot of reasons. I mean, although all the things that have been said tonight are all true. And I certainly concur with them. Waste Management's a great community partner. They provide good service at good rates. So it's I'm certainly I would never suggest that we be looking for somebody different, but I think we do need to be paying attention to the contract economic factors as well. One area, I think, if this were an internal city service, this department, the Waste Management Department, would have been participating in our new work-based learning program for young people in the community, and we have a variety of private sector partners that are doing the same. I do think to me, that's an area I'd like to see raise in this process is Waste Management participating, like the city and other private sector partners, in the work that we're doing with the schools and colleges in the community around the career pathways, the piece. But the other question I had was about the residential food waste collection issue, because which we have not been doing in the city, and I know I raised this in the last time around we did the contract, and we didn't get to it. And I see it's in the sketch, but it's in the sketch as a collection as part of the green waste collection. Now the challenge with that is, some of the folks, the Metroplex at Washington Square, my neighborhood in the Bridge District, Ironworks, Riva, places where folks are into composting and organic uses, whatever, they cannot, they have no yard, so there's not a yard waste, there's not a backyard composting alternative. But because they have no yard, there's no yard, I don't have a yard waste bin, right? So we need a food composting and food organics collection mechanism that is not only open to people that have large yards in terms of food composting. So this approach is not enough to get there. It's a good anchor into it, but I do think that issue is important to be dealing with as we're getting some of those new neighborhoods up and running, and some of the existing ones that don't have yard waste on a significant basis. But I think these are some good ideas as a beginning point. The economics are the most important piece of it, obviously. And for some of the programmatic elements, like which education programs and what have you that they're doing, I hope you are also evaluating them over time. I mean, which ones? I mean, just because we had something in the last contract that Waste Management would do, something with McGruff the crime dog or whatever. Is it actually having an effect in terms of diversion or not? Right. So we shouldn't just accrete, a cute little program and then another program and another program and another program. We should be applying some metrics to them and then figuring out through this, in this contract process, what are the highest payoff ones. And I think because of the 50% diversion requirement that's here, there's an incentive for both parties to do so. But I do think it's a valuable guide star for the way that we approach those kinds of elements of the contract as well. So, right. Any other comments or discussion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we hear the presentation regarding the analysis of waste hauling services contract. Recommend to begin unlimited term negotiations with Waste Management to secure a new contract. Direct staff to begin with a 3-month negotiation with Waste Management to secure a new contract with the understanding that the city will begin the competitive procedural process if a satisfactory agreement cannot be reached within that time frame.
Okay, and it's as described by Ms. Benner, which is it's the recommendation at the bottom of page 15 of the consultant report as well, that has the provisions with respect to the upfront cost and the extension that's required as well. So.
Correct. I'd like to add that to
Okay.
my motion.
Is there a second then? It's been moved by Mr. Christoph and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. Item 12 is a workshop on the Broadway Bridge feasibility study.
Senior Planner of Public Works Department. As Broadway Bridge continues to move forward, we felt it important to receive feedback from the council as well as direction on the topics that are going to be presented today. Katie Yancey is by my side, Senior Program Manager at the City Manager's Office. She's going to be presenting on portions of the Pioneer Bluff Reuse Plan, the coordination between this project and that. Also in the audience are Greg Osland and Mike Higgins from CH2M, consultants on the Broadway Bridge feasibility study. So the objectives for this evening are to receive feedback from the council on the 4 proposed bridge alignments and 4 proposed bridge cross sections recommended to move forward into the next phase of the project. Additionally, the direct relationship that exists between the Broadway Bridge and Pioneer Bluff has prompted the additional presentation by Katie Yancey on the reuse plan and the need for confirmation of circulation objectives within this infill site. You'll see the slide before you represents the overall objectives of the Broadway Bridge project, including the feasibility study as well as the PAED or project approval environmental document phase. We're currently in the feasibility study phase, and we're wrapping that up, and we'll be moving into the next phase. We have engaged the different stakeholders in a variety of different methods, including council workshops, as well as gathering stakeholder feedback at a community open house, which consequently that open house was advertised through direct mail to residents in all the states, as well as on Facebook and Twitter, the city highlights, as well as the newspaper, and on our website. So we
Here's Snapchat.
no Snapchat. We did, however, receive a large amount of positive feedback from the communities of both Sacramento and West Sacramento, and we had attendance by over 80 representatives from both both communities, roughly 40% from West Sacramento and 60% from the city of Sacramento. We've now are in the process of identifying or have identified potentially viable bridge alignments, total of 4, as well as 4 viable bridge cross sections and several circulation connection alternatives in both West Sacramento and Sacramento. We've also performed an analysis of bridge types based on engineering design constraints and are in the process of completing technical memos to support the environmental scoping and direct subsequent analysis in the next phase. The PAED phase is scheduled to commence March 2016 and will consist of evaluating the alternatives advanced by the feasibility study, including these 4 alignments presented to you today. These are recommended to move forward into the environmental phase and include a range extending from the northernmost potential alignment to the southernmost potential alignment based on engineering constraints as well as United States Coast Guard requirements that were based on a field visit that was conducted on the Sacramento River, as well as solicitation of public comments from users of the waterway. These alignments also represent primary connections to either 15th Street directly or 5th Street, which is formerly South River Road, and each connection alternative have traffic implications that I'll actually introduce later in this presentation. This is a list of the recommended movable bridge types that we'd like to bring forward into the PAED phase of the project. These include the vertical lift bridge, which locally is represented by the Tower Bridge, as well as a swing bridge, you'll see at the bottom of the slide here, which is represented by I Street Bridge. The double leaf bascule also meets the minimum channel clearance and maximum requirement for the 170-foot channel span for the navigational clearance. But what we did eliminate was a single leaf bascule, which does not meet the maximum channel span requirements. These are the recommended bridge section options that we are proposing to take forward into the next phase. Each of these represent bridge sections that were already reviewed in the 2011 Sacramento River Crossings Alternatives Study. Those include a 2-lane option as well as 4-lane option. We have chosen to advance an additional option based on discussion that we had with our own Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission and discussions with the City of Sacramento, and that's a 2- to 4-lane conversion option. So that being an operational 2-lane bridge, but the actual right-of-way width would be able to accommodate a 4-lane configuration if in the future it was deemed necessary. We came up with this option after several conversations with the I Street Bridge, as well as with this bridge with Caltrans, who indicated to us that it would not be recommended in their opinion to move forward with built-in obsolescence of a bridge. That being a potential 2-lane bridge could eliminate the ability to expand in the future as movable bridges can't be readily expanded. So if in the future traffic conditions were to warrant a 4-lane configuration, as they had indicated to us, a lot of cities have come back to Caltrans in order to seek additional funds for another bridge because they were not able to expand their infrastructure that they had recently developed. So this is one of those options that we felt was prudent to bring forward into the environmental document for analysis. The other options are both 4-lane options, one being a 4-lane multimodal bridge option. The other 4 lanes, but with 2 vehicle lanes and 2 transit-only lanes. That was not only in the 2011 river crossing study, but it was also recommended by our own TMI commission as a potential alternative to bring forward in the environmental document. So we wanted to respect that and bring that forward as well. In this slide are the future traffic volumes. You have seen this in the past, but this is a more refined analysis that was conducted using the Sacramento model. This accounts for roadways, bikeways, and land use assumptions that are in the SACOG MTP, as well as the general plans for both cities. The model confirmed that the inclusion of the Broadway Bridge facilitates local Sacramento River crossings without using the state highway system, thereby reducing local congestion on Business 80. Broadway Bridge is estimated to carry between 30,000 and 50,000 vehicles per day by 2040 based on model projections. By comparison, Tower Bridge currently carries 26,000 vehicles per day, and Pioneer Bridge currently carries 177,000 vehicles per day. So that kind of gives you an idea of the carrying capacities. The model also showed that in West Sacramento, the location of the street connections from the bridge, either at 5th Street or 15th Street, influences the direction of the travel of vehicles, which the model shows primarily travel between Southport to downtown Sacramento area and back. So the location of the connection will influence the direction that vehicles choose or people choose to travel in their vehicles. So direct connection to 5th Street, you'll see predominantly vehicles will be traveling down 5th Street towards Southport, whereas a direct connection to Jefferson via 15th Street has a tendency to split the traffic. I'd like to bring this over to Katie Yancey to talk about some of the development objectives of Pioneer Bluff and some of the coordination efforts that have been taking place between Broadway Bridge and the Pioneer Bluff reuse plan.
So, good evening. The Pioneer Bluff transition plan that was approved by the council in 2014 contained a series of recommendations in the action plan, and one of those primary recommendations was for the reuse master planning effort to coordinate with all of the ongoing regional and citywide planning projects, and it called out coordination with the Broadway Bridge as being a key foundational area for us to focus our attention on. And there are 15 planning principles that were recommended for incorporation in the land use planning effort. And 2 of them deal distinctly with the Broadway Bridge. One of them references the location of Riverfront Street and how the Riverfront Street 5th and 15th intersection, which you see in a diagram here, should be revisited not only for the traffic implications that were studied in the Bridge District specific plan, but also that 15th Street is a potential natural connection for the Broadway Bridge. And as you see, the pink and blue lines that coincide with the diagram that Jason showed earlier would in fact interrupt that intersection, which is included in the specific plan. There are 3 development agreements that are vested in this roadway configuration. And so one of the proposed remedies for moving forward with the feasibility study is to have a coordinated memo come from Jason and I to the city manager's office that articulates sort of the existing vesting rights in the process for looking at the implications of proceeding with a direct connection into 15th Street. One of the items that we wanted to bring to the council's attention is that the 15th Street intersection was proposed as the most recent community design application, and we have been put on SACOG's recommended list for partial funding for the construction of this intersection. And so pretty soon here we'll be looking for council's direction, including some initial feedback this evening about how we might want to tackle this issue of addressing what the Bridge District specific plan and the DA say about 15th Street and Riverfront Street, and what the Broadway Bridge might be looking at as a potential connection point as it relates to this very likely grant award. We've had some initial comments from the property owners that were aware of these alignments. These alignments were presented at the July open house, and we've received some support at looking at realigning Riverfront Street and analyzing a different configuration of this intersection. And so staff is recommending a minor feasibility study be conducted as part of the reuse master planning effort that would occur starting now through the commencement of the SACOG process in spring, to talk about these ideas and bring them back to the council for input. So that's one example of how we're coordinating. Another example is Jason referenced at his first presentation back in July to the council that we're looking at a similar street hierarchy or a combined layer street network. These were comments, these were phrases that we used in both the Bridge District effort and the Washington effort. The traffic analysis that's been done, which was done at a very macro level, clearly shows that Jefferson and Fifth Street or South River Road, they operate in conjunction with each other. And so starting off initially with this idea that one is an automobile-centric 4-lane arterial, and the other one is a TOD, multimodal-centric 4-lane arterial, was something that we were seeking council direction from, because as we're proceeding with our scoping for our traffic analysis and cataloging the urban design standards, which was a part of Tom Trzynski's contract amendment that was just previously approved, we're looking for council's input on, is that the right direction for us to be heading? Is that these are both arterials, but essentially, which is consistent with the with other city documents, that they are operating in different levels of service, they're operating at different traffic capacities, but they're both essentially arterials, but with just different users. So those are two examples, primary examples of how we're trying to coordinate our efforts and ensure that our models are speaking to each other, and that we are balancing these citywide traffic patterns with these urban waterfront traffic patterns, and making sure that we're capturing all of the modal splits, not just the automobile trips.
So we have the next steps before you. Currently, we are working to finalize our draft memos, which include some environmental memos, technical memos, identify some possible environmental issues in the area that are known, especially with some of the work that we've already done with I Street. We are coordinating with Caltrans on some of our identified alternatives and how they interface with the state highway system. In December, we plan to complete the feasibility study, but we will also be bringing those technical memos back to the council for review and hopefully acceptance at that time. In January, we'll be kicking off the PAED phase with sending out the bids and receiving those consultant bids, and then making a consultant selection. And then in March is the formal kickoff of the project with the environmental scoping meeting, which this portion of the project is funded with the Tiger grant that we received, the $1.5 million plus the $750,000 from the city of West Sacramento and $750,000 from the city of Sacramento. So we are available to answer any questions that you might have. Again, the consultants are also available here to provide additional insight.
All right, questions at this time? Mr. Johannesson.
Just maybe a preliminary question on the 2 to 4 lane conversion. How does that work with the converting it to 4 lanes?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
How
that?
does the 2 lane to 4 lane conversion, what is the configuration to convert that to 4? Because you've got a raised median. It looks like actually the lanes are quite a bit narrower than the standard 4 lane.
Right, we'd be looking at 11-foot travel ways. If, say, we went from the 2-lane conversion to a 4-lane, the median would be removed. The travel lanes would be reconfigured from the 13 feet that are represented there to 11-foot travel lanes with 6-foot bike lanes, eliminating the 2-foot buffer that would also be included. There are different configurations that could be explored. This is just one option. But what this represents, it would be the minimum travel lane widths that would still accommodate streetcar. I know our standards are 12-foot travel lanes for transit. However, in the city of Sacramento, their standards in the rail yard, for instance, is 11 feet. So it would be one of those instances where we could accommodate a 2-lane configuration without having a significantly wider right-of-way for this bridge, still able to adapt in the future date to a 4-lane, if that would be something that both cities would be interested in having.
And so you're saying that the converting it to 4-lane, you would not lose the bike lanes?
You would not lose the bike lanes, no. You would lose the 2-foot buffers. Currently, we're showing them as 8 feet. That would be a 6-foot bike lane with a 2-foot buffer. But in order to accommodate the lane widths, you would definitely have to remove the buffers. We could, though, explore a slightly wider right-of-way option that could retain the buffers. It would be another 4 feet to accommodate that. So these are by no means, final configurations, but they are a starting point for us to start identifying what are the potential environmental and community impacts based on these rough ideas.
And then when you're looking at the streetcar, you're looking at that in the flow of traffic, not a separate lane?
That's correct, except for the 4-lane configuration
Right.
with 2 transit-only lanes. Those would be specifically for local bus, regional bus use, streetcar, or for potential bus rapid transit, BRT.
Yeah, okay, well, I mean, just finally, I think I attended some of the very early discussions on this bridge at the zoo across the river. It was probably 5 years or 10 years ago or something like that. Yeah, so this idea of having a more intimate bridge, I think, at least publicly, is a good option. And, we were also talking, I think, about having the bridge having some kind of architectural distinction to make a statement. It seems that to have things a little compact, even though it would be tight if you have to roll out 4 lanes, it seems, just aesthetically, it seems that would be a better option, because when you start getting, looks like the standard 4 lane is going to be a big road. And when you're walking or biking along that, it's going to feel like a really big road. It could become a little more complicated when you have 4 lanes, but I think, the idea would have, something where people want to walk across and use as a bicycle and walking commutes as well as cars, so it kind of de-emphasize car traffic and emphasize some of the other multi-modes that are going in.
Just to pick up on that, because I have a similar concern, but slightly different conclusion, which is, because I worry that the 2 to 4 lane conversion gets us in some sense the worst of both worlds. We're building a 2-lane bridge that we all have to go to Caltrans, and we have to somehow convince the federal government or whoever's going to pay for what's going to be despite what you say, it's going to be $150 or to $200 million bridge, for which we're not going to have the local funding to do that. That's not, we'll do our share, but it's not going to be a city-funded project. And so and those funding sources all care about, what's the capacity of this bridge. They're not interested in building a 2-lane bridge. It's going to need to have the capacity to be, the point that you already made about Caltrans, essentially. So it's going to, and it's needed, right? The Tower Bridge is a 4-lane bridge. And when we were talking about neighborhood friendly, we said, what do you mean by that? Oh, like the Tower Bridge as opposed to the Pioneer Bridge. But the Tower Bridge is a 4-lane bridge. It doesn't feel like a freeway, and it could be designed better for pedestrians and bikes for sure, and for crossings and all of that, but it's not a massive facility, and so I think you can design that. As a biker, I would prefer that you build the 4-lane bridge rather than build the 2-lane and then convert to 4, where I lose the buffer, and the car lane next to me is a foot narrower than the city standards. So the car is going to have less room than it would have in a typical West Sacramento street, and now there's no buffer. So I would rather let's build it for that it's going to be. It could still start with 4, but with 2, but it's still really built for 4 rather than built for 2, and then somehow you squeeze the 4th in, and then cramp cyclists in particular and other users of that lane in. Because with a buffer, you could actually envision some sort of physical buffer, not just 2 feet of paint. But you cannot do that with the conversion bridge option, because you're already at a premium for lane width. So I agree with where to go in terms of getting the scale to feel right and getting crossings and the engineering of it to convey that it is mainly a bridge for walking and biking and wheelchairs. But you can do that with other design and engineering cues that don't require it to become unsafe. Because the I Street Bridge is only 2 lanes, but it's the most unsafe bridge I've ever been on for a cyclist. or for a pedestrian, because it's too damn narrow. It doesn't create intimacy, it creates like you are taking your life in your hands. So we don't want that. So just to pick up on that point, I think I agree with where to go, but I just feel like we're going to end up at 4 at some point. So let's design what that's going to be in a way that's going to function properly, and then let's get the design and the architecture and the engineering right in ways that send other cues to make it, to signal that this is principally a bridge that's intended to support the kind of walking and biking connectivity that we're describing. I'm struggling with the question that Katie posed around Riverfront and or the current South River Road and Jefferson. I've probably suggested exactly what you have said at one point or another, but I don't know what the right answer is, because I like the idea. Okay, we're starting fresh with Riverfront / South River Road, and it's going to be lots of higher density development right up against the street front, and it's going to be well suited for transit, biking, walking, streetcar, everything else. So let's engineer it that way. And then Jefferson Jefferson is what it is today, which is a mini version of a freeway, at least in that stretch. But if you're thinking about actual usage patterns for folks getting onto Riverfront from the Mike McGowan Bridge on the east side of Southport, Jefferson's not going to be it's not the right alternative for them. So I don't know what the right answer is. Again, you don't want to make both of them. You don't want to make both of them into like both crappy car movement and not good for transit-oriented development. So I get the reason for the question, and I don't have an answer or direction myself. Maybe Mr. Ledesma does, but I'm not yet fully convinced that the completely specialized approach is going to be the right one. Then on just the last topic, the 15th Street connection. At least my bias towards the 15th Street connection as opposed to south of 15th is this notion that the bridge is bringing together Old West Sacramento, literal Old Sacramento, Westmore Oaks and the state streets, and providing connectivity to the river, to the rest of what's on the other side of the river and to the riverfront, and integrating those districts together, and that it splits the traffic, that makes the Broadway Bridge serve more of the community than only being a Southport or almost entirely a Southport serving bridge. So I do like that about it. And I also, I know it someday in 200 years from now, when Mr. Kristoff and I have both recently retired from the council, that Charlene is going to come in here and convince a subsequent council to close off Park Boulevard. So we can't get onto the freeway from that neighborhood, because it's been a fight we've been having for 25 years.
We will raise from the grave.
Yes, we will raise from the grave. But if that happens, then these patterns will be different, and this will be the only connectivity outward for the state streets in Westmore Oaks neighborhood. We don't want to create an environment in which the folks who live in Old West Sacramento are expected to drive down to Stone Boulevard in order to drive back up to cross the river. That's not a realistic assumption. And so the 15th Street alignment seems like it's better suited towards that. The downside, of course, is if it's not done properly, then it creates a potential for a funnel of traffic into the State Streets neighborhood. I get that, but I think again, the design of that in order to encourage the connectivity without encouraging the attraction into that neighborhood is something to strive for in this process. But yes, to pay attention to the funding prospect, I do think is really important, because all the public input's going to be, what I would like is the most beautiful bridge possible. Give me the Bay Bridge times 10, but also build it so nobody else uses it except for me. And those are great, but they don't pay for a $200 million bridge. And we do need to have that as one of the the planning principles for this bridge, is how's it actually going to get funded.
Yeah. Well, you kind of hit on the one I wanted to start on, which is the whole, the waterfront traffic patterns that will be created, and what we're going to do about 5th Street, because it will be connected to Southport, will be connected to the Stone Locks District, and that is, we've been talking about the Village Parkway and the north-south extension being the next arterial, at least funneling point. So it creates a certain I know the city manager and I talked about it a bit today, kind of the conundrum it puts us in terms of how are we going to manage that. And I'm like the mayor, I don't have an answer for it. But I do know that stretch along the Pioneer Bluff is something we need to pay attention to about how it connects. Because what I'm seeing today, and granted, there's limited connection points for residents, are bicyclers coming up the McGowan Bridge. I'm seeing actual people running, jogging through an industrial area to get to the Bridge District or get on their biking toward Midtown, which. Baby strollers, yeah, you do, and it's really odd, but it's great. And the roadway itself has a unique pattern because it does wind. It's not the straight thoroughfare like Jefferson. It kind of winds around, and so there'll be some traffic calming. So I just know what the part that's to keep in mind is how do we, I don't want to say preserve that, but how do we capture that and articulate that as we think about it. I'm with the mayor in terms of the 15th Street crossing. I just think 20 years after we build it, if we built it with a southerly, not adjacent to 15th Street connection point, we're just going to kick ourselves, and everyone will kick us as well for the exact reasons the mayor brought up. People are wondering, why are they making us come all this way? It's just engineering the wrong way with trying to mitigate what we're afraid of. And what are we afraid of? We're of success at the 15th Street crossing and at the intersection. And it's exactly what we want. We want that will be the center of the riverfront Pioneer Bluff. And we just need to figure out how to make it work. I was just perusing the traffic count you have anticipated coming into 15th Street crossing Jefferson. And it's astounding, but it's also a sign of success. So designed right, the intersection will be lively. Hopefully we'll have good anchors of residents and offices or whatever we have there, mixed use properties that'll keep it alive. So we've got to think less about the amount of traffic. That is important. I know we're planning and preparing for the environmental document, but we're also trying to create a place of success where people are traveling to and from. And and I'll bring up kind of the point that which should have been my first point on my comments is I'm just so happy we're talking about a bridge. And there was nothing harder in Chicago when we did the study mission, and I gave a talk along a boat riding the Chicago River. And in the first 5-10 minutes of the boat ride, we went through 4 or 5 bridges that crossed Illinois. And granted, it's much more dense, much more urban, and they're iron bascule bridges, which are corroding from the salt they use during the wintertime. But it just reminded me that we have a lot of work to do. And we have a unique opportunity now with Sacramento and trying to get this and the I Street replacement bridge done. So I'm just happy as a client we're even having this discussion, and the fact that we're setting the table for what the next phase of development in the Pioneer Bluff is. I'm just trying to make sure we're careful to not be afraid of success, and also to make sure, as we talked about along 5th Street, and how that will, the South River Road connection to the Village Parkway, is just to make sure it stays, I know we have a lot of work to do on that, it stays true to what it's currently serving as, which is kind of a multi-use parkway to kind of get back and forth. It could also be an arterial. So I don't know how we do that, but we'll figure it out.
That's a whole thing.
Ms. Sandine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think I have a lot more to add than what's been shared. I was curious about, I think this project is so far in the future. I mean, I hope it's sooner, it gets done more quickly, but do we have any worries about the railway crossing at 15th and Jefferson? It seems like that would be a lot of traffic to back up across a bridge if we were stopped there. So that was a concern of mine. I think the alignment does seem to make a lot of sense to me, but that just occurred to me that could be a big issue.
Well, the assumption that we're going with that has continued forward from the Bridge District, that is going to continue with Pioneer Bluff, and that we are going with Broadway Bridge, is that the rail relocation will eliminate those crossings, and that will not have that as a constraint. So just keeping that assumption going and keeping toward the work of actually completing that project is going to be a main focus of not only ourselves, but I think other departments as well.
There's a consistency to that assumption as well. I should just want to articulate that if you look at the time frame in the MTP for the Broadway Bridge, and the time frame for when the Bridge District says rail will be gone, they're consistent. It's 2025, 2035. So who knows if that'll actually be the case, but it's consistent with all of our other planning efforts to assume that the rail has been removed and that we have, that barrier is eliminated.
Oh, I'm just saying, the city managers deliver the bridge 10 to 15 years ahead of schedule. Relocation could happen a lot quicker too, right?
Ribbon cutting on Friday. All right, anything further on this item? This is a workshop only. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, council calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here's a couple of items that might be of interest to the council. The City Council 2x2 meeting that's supposed to be held on October 28th has been canceled. And then on November 10th, there's an American Leadership Forum dinner, which is honoring the mayor and Kathy McKim as exemplary leaders. That dinner is from 5:30 to 9 at the Doubletree. And the council's been given this information previously and has asked to RSVP. And if you are unable to attend, please let us know.
All right, and this is for many viewers at home, this is Amanda Berlin, the new assistant, I think it's your first appearance. as
This
city
is our
council,
very
right?
first meeting.
New assistant city manager.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, Ms. Sandine?
Yeah, welcome. I had a quick question. I think I missed the first part, the October 28th. It shows on our calendar, there's a city school 2x2, but I think the next meeting's actually December 7th.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's actually a typo in the
Okay.
October calendar. So that should be the city-county 2x2 on October 28th.
Got it.
And that's been canceled.
Got it, thank you. And we also have the Universal Preschool for West Sacramento meeting that morning, just so you're aware.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, any other questions on the calendar? Seeing none, city manager reports?
Just briefly, Mayor, you mentioned the Southport Elementary School presentation on Monday. Earlier this week, we had, as part of California Flood Preparedness Week, we had an EOC drill at the Legacy Club at Rayleigh Field. It was great. The fire department did a wonderful job organizing that with our flood staff. We had great participation from the state and federal agencies. A tremendous drill. We'll pull you in as we evolve our drills, particularly as it relates to communications. We also had a session last week with Holland Knight, Rich Gold, and Mike Lano were here. Councilmember Sandine met with them in the morning. They met with the executive staff. We're shaping up our federal agenda for next year, and Holland Knight's just doing a fabulous job for us. Earlier today, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma joined the president of Shinmei Holdings for a meeting, and thank you for coming and speaking Japanese to the group. It was very good. But Shinmei Holdings is the parent company for Shinmei USA, which has recently opened its plant. Amanda didn't mention it, but I just want to remind folks that the Yellow Leaders event is October 28th at 4 o'clock in Winters, and there's been a big push to try to get council participation there.
All right, any questions on the city manager's reports? Senator Penn's bill was signed by the governor.
Yes, I
We've
thought we
updated on that,
Yeah.
on that before, but not at the meeting, so. Okay, city attorney report. Any staff direction from members of the council? And we have no future agenda item. Oh, sorry.
I actually,
Mr. Johansson?
Mr. Mayor, yes. I've been approached by Carrie Hess of the youth coordinator at the Yolo County Health and Human Service Agency to look at a potential e-cigarette ban in workspaces and enclosed public spaces. Woodland and Davis have already passed this. The county board of supervisors is looking at it now. So the request would be just to see if there's a willingness to put that on an agenda to look at it for West Sacramento.
So maybe a workshop?
Something like that, have them present.
Yep. Is that a staffing, is it within your?
It's whenever, I don't think it's time urgent, but, sometime within
This
the next
meeting
month.
already.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever it works out and it's convenient.
Okay, there's no objection? Okay.
All right, thanks.
All right, then is there a motion to adjourn? It's been moved by Ms. Sandine and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.